And good afternoon, Flagstaff. Happy Sunday. It is a beautiful day outside. Um, Today would have been perfect to do the broadcast from outside, but I don't know, for whatever strange reason. Good afternoon, Sister Margaret Boatright, and we're indoors today, which is, I think, the first time for you that we've done the book club with you being in your little book nook.
I know. It's 100 and something outside right now. I
Oh
wanted to be
gosh,
out. Yeah, I just didn't think I could maintain my freshness.
I get it. I get it.
Something.
Well, we greet you and we thank you for being here, and we thank our viewers and supporters of the Lived Black Experience Project for joining us. This edition of our broadcast features our monthly book club. And we're in the month of May, actually, at the end of it, and we have read two books this month. One being The Miseducation of the Negro by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and The Invisible Man by Mr. Ralph Ellison. And so today, I think we're going to talk about The Miseducation of the Negro, which is one of my favorites. And for those of you who did not know, this is a historic book and so on so many different levels. First of all, Dr. Woodson is the father of Black history. And in February 1926, he launched the celebration of Negro History Week, which led us into Black History Month. So I'm really excited, Sister Boatright, that you're going to be talking about this book today, because I think it's probably one of the most important books when it comes to the lived Black experience of people of African descent here in America.
Absolutely. I have to totally agree with you. There's so many really poignant and important points that this book made back in 1922, I think.
Yeah.
They're still relatable today, and so really trying to make those connections, and it's kind of unfortunate too to be able to make the connections, because then you see a negative pattern of history repeating itself, but at the same time it validates what we're seeing right now and what we're experiencing at the same time.
Exactly. Well, again, we thank you for meeting us and being in your book nook. And go ahead and take us away with your thoughts and review of The Miseducation of the Negro by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. We'll see you on the other side.
And it's going to be a quick other side, because I can't wait, Dr. Lewis, to get you back into this conversation. I know that this is one of your favorite books, and so I'm so excited to hear some of your perspectives. So I'm just going to take a brief amount of time to talk about some of those key points that really stood out and stuck with me, and kind of really started to formulate some of the things that I hope that we would be able to tackle and cover today during our short time together. One of the things that jumped out in like the first page, the first couple pages of the book, talks about the fact that inferiority is drilled in to the Negro student. And I feel like, that's kind of what we've been talking about in the other books that we have reviewed so far. But when we talk about education, how important it must be to realize that there are some things that are going on in elementary schools, in high schools, even in institutions of higher education, that continue to instill a sense of inferiority among African American students. And so while I think that I hope that we have evolved to a place where it isn't so, what is it? The word, like, so obvious, so like overt, so in your face. But I think right now we're at and that does happen sometimes, but we're more so at a place where we're really dealing with a lot of those covert actions that put African American children at risk for developing inferiority complexes. And one of the things that I thought about was some acts of implicit bias. And so when we talk about implicit bias, it's a situation where and everybody does it. It doesn't matter what your race or your background is, but it is those unspoken attitudes and subconscious beliefs that you may have about an individual or a group of individuals that causes you to act in a certain way that you might not even be able to explain, because again, it's unconscious. So when I think about in elementary schools about how often our Latino and African American students are being identified as having great potential for academic outcomes or life outcomes, I think that it's not any more explicit than when we look at some of the more subjective things, like how students get referred for gifted programs. So I did a little internet research and found a few articles that gave me some ballpark numbers in about the same area, that shares that African American and Hispanic students represent roughly 40% of the US elementary education population. However, that same 40% of the educational population in public education only represents 10% of the gifted population. And I think that is a direct correlation to what I'm referring us back to as that implicit bias. If we have teachers that have certain ideas about the limitations that individuals have, they might not then be in such a great place to recognize when a student comes across them that's showing signs of giftedness, and might be more willing to write that off as, oh, you know, he's kind of bright, or, oh, you're having a great day, but is this a trait or a pattern or something worth nurturing in this child? So I think that some of those more subtle acts really are contributing to some of this inferiority complex that some of our students have. I've had kind of the, one of the byproducts of this COVID quarantine and lockdown was having the opportunity to sometimes eavesdrop on my daughter's second grade classroom. And it starts to make me wonder, you know, there are certain kids who get called on very frequently, and there are other kids that get reprimanded frequently, more frequently than others. And unfortunately, I'm starting to kind of detect a little bit of a pattern, and wondering, you know, why aren't we spreading this around? Why aren't we doing things that take us out of our implicit bias pattern? It's so easy for a teacher to say, I'm going to draw names out of a popsicle, you know, popsicle sticks out of a can to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to get called on, rather than calling on males because they seem to do better in math, or females because they may be better in grammar, or things like that. So that was one of the things that stood out to me and has some kind of a relation to what I believe is continuing to happen, even though possibly in different ways than it was when this book was originally written. Another area that I wanted to touch on had to do, and this was in the early pages of the book also, about public education and the content of what's being presented in classes, and also the resources about what's being available to be taught in classes. So early in the book, it gives some examples of if you have certain lessons in math that you're teaching to an African American student versus a white student, and what their background knowledge is, and how you might have to differentiate based on if you're talking about budgeting and managing money back in the 1920s, that might be something that a white student might have more experience with in seeing their parents managing the budget, whereas at that same time, African American students might be more, you know, those families are on survival mode. They might be more migrant workers. They're not necessarily observing their parents balancing out the checking account. And so really understanding how to make education more relevant to the individuals that you're teaching so that they can actually gain something and move forward with it. So that topic came out a few times. And so I thought that that might be worth delving into a little bit more. Another topic that stood out to me was the concept of the educated Negro, and how in my mind that educated Negro is kind of in a catch-22, because, you know, we're educated in and indoctrinated into the general culture of, you know, white America, but and especially back then, and even I think a little bit now, people struggle with, how do I take this education that's mainstream and make it relevant in going back to my own people, into my own population, and really handing, like giving them a hand up so that they can reach the same kinds of levels of education and prosperity that I have. So it talks about understanding what those resources are, how to, trying to be really creative and realizing that if we're not reaching back into our own communities and to our own populations, we better believe that other people are from other races. So just because we're not seeing those opportunities to go back into our communities, to build them up, to create businesses that are owned by ourselves, if we're not doing it, then other people certainly will take advantage of those opportunities and take the place that we could be taking in our own communities. So definitely something that I think we're still seeing. And then another big thing, and I think this kind of goes hand in hand, it talks about how education tends to drift from the truth. And I didn't realize that there was actually legislation that African-American students should not be reading or have being exposed to the Constitution and our inalienable rights, because while if we have these kinds of ideas about what we should expect from the nation that we've helped build and that we live in and that we want to thrive in, then that might give us some ideas that might get us out of the situation that we're in. And I still see, although yes, we are now familiar with the Constitution, the book also goes on to talk about how we've been miseducated as far as politics and certain things related to that. And so in those two areas of the book, I really of late have been thinking about things about how history hasn't been rewritten, it's just been whitewashed. I can't think of a better term, but I think that it's important for us to realize that in order to live and learn and grow, and we've talked about this in past months, is we really need to be at a place where we're willing to acknowledge the good, the bad, and the ugly of our history, and not be afraid to empower people and make them aware of the things that our ancestors have experienced, what we continue to experience, and try to make some of those connections so that we can move forward from it. And I think that nothing really speaks more to that than the more recent 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa massacres, where there was a place, Black Wall Street, where there were some prominent and successful and affluent African-American people really building a community of educated people and really having a say in their lives, only to have that literally set on fire. And how many people are not aware of that significant piece of history that happened just 100 years ago. And really trying to explain, I had a conversation with my mom just this past week where she was even saying, I just feel so misled. Why was I never taught about this? Why was I never made aware of this? Why am I just now hearing about this? Because really, when you think about it, it was an act of terrorism in our own territory, in our own country. And I think that when those acts of terrorism occur, for example, September 11th, that's something that we can acknowledge because someone else did it to us. And so that's a huge part of our history that we're willing to acknowledge. But when we look 100 years ago at some domestic terrorism that occurred, it's not something that our country is proud of. It's not something that we want to talk about. And so it doesn't get acknowledged. And so those kinds of things that happen contribute to the story that we're not so much talking about, but it makes us feel invisible, that our history isn't important, that those stories and those occurrences don't speak to who we are and who we can be and who we could be, because it's discounted and kind of brushed under the rug as part of our history, as well as a part of American history. One last thing that I wanted to also draw attention to was a text message, because am somewhat politically unaware myself at times. I get buried in my own life and day to day and just kind of making things happen. And I actually got a text message from one of my friends who is an attorney and very politically connected, who I want to pull it up if I possibly could. I should have. Hold on a second. Oops. Here it comes. Because when I pulled it up last time, it disappeared. But it was a picture of a tweet, actually, that went out And it was referring to, of course, I'm not going to find it now. It was talking to State Bill 1532 that pretty much was saying that it will fine teachers up to 10% of their salary for talking about political issues, historical issues that make students feel uncomfortable. And it also talks about requiring teachers to take a non-biased stance when presenting pieces of American history, again, that might be controversial, considered to be controversial, and force people to examine themselves, examine their history, and feel uncomfortable. And so I really feel like that goes back to what this book is talking about, and it takes it to a broader audience, that it's not only the miseducation of the Negro that we're talking about passing current legislation as recently as several weeks ago in the month of May 2021, is that we're trying to pass legislation that makes it illegal to talk about our difficult and sometimes dark history. And people will feel vulnerable about that. So I think it's not only the miseducation of the Negro, I think it's the miseducation of the American population, making it taboo and uncomfortable to talk about that. And I think when we even think about if this bill passes in the House, how likely is it then that we're going to be able to recruit a diverse base or a pool of teachers as an educator, especially if I think of someone working in public education or even private education, but I think this would more so affect public education. How likely would I be to want to move to Arizona or any of the other states that are trying to adopt this kind of legislation, where I wouldn't be able to speak freely about issues in our history that might cause other people to be uncomfortable? I know even in my own experience, again, with my second grade daughter, during Black History Month, when it was time to review some of the basics, Martin Luther King, it was very disturbing to receive an email from the teacher saying, "We have these packets of Martin Luther King. Please come pick them up in the office if you're homeschooling." And then there was a small sentence on the bottom of the email that said, "And please contact me if you have any questions or if you want to opt your child out of this unit." And to me, that's disturbing and goes to the point of, if we're not willing to talk about these difficult issues, then we're not going to move forward, and we're going to continue to make people feel invisible and undervalued or unvalued in our society. So those were my big takeaways. There were a lot of other things that we most certainly can talk about, but those were just some of the bigger pictures and takeaways that I gained from the readings.
Wonderful. Wonderful. You know, I have questions for you. I
Yay.
always like picking your brain, because that's what you do. You work with the brain and can help us gain deeper insight into how we're thinking. I, I want to start out by asking you. I read this book quite like at least once a year and always come away with something different. Where we are with, and you just talked about how education is changing like right before our eyes. um I want to ask you, what do you think? I had older parents, and my mother was a school teacher. My aunts were all school teachers and principals, and you know their thinking was that we have to take responsibility for educating ourselves, and so my mom, as a school teacher, wasn't really all that stressed out about what was exempt from the history books, from the social studies books, or any other topic, that we weren't getting in the classroom, because my aunts and my mom made sure that we got it outside of school. I don't know if you recall, did you play school when you were growing up?
All the time.
Yeah. Do kids still do that?
I don't know.
No, I mean, I'm asking all of that too, and making the comment. I want to ask you, so what do you think our responsibility is to educate our children? We're sending them to school, and I'm sure we have some viewers that'll say, well, I'm paying my tax dollars and I'm sending my kid to school, and so they should be getting the education that they need. Where do you think we stand, and especially with the way things are changing about what we can teach our children? So, what do you think our responsibility is as parents?
Well, I'm with your parents. I feel like if you want something done right, you must be willing to do it yourself. I think that, and it goes back. I sometimes I feel like I'm the minority person that not completely upset about the separate, like taking prayer out of schools, only because I worked in a school. Because up until the point that I started working in a school, I was like, why shouldn't children be able to pray in school? And this is not a new thing. This has been since before I started school. And then I met some teachers. And some teachers, I don't want praying over my child. My first year as a teacher, I met a kindergarten teacher who was a self-professed Wiccan, and I had to look it up. What is that? And so as soon as I figured out, oh, you're a witch, I didn't know that was a real thing because I'm Eve. And then I thought, well, you know what? I don't want everybody praying over my children. I don't want everybody laying hands because I don't know what you're praying on them.
Right.
Handle that at home myself. I feel the same way about education. I feel like, and I'm new at this, parent of a child in public education, but I feel like in preschool we learned about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and in kindergarten Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and in first and second grade the same thing, and it's just scratching the surface. And I feel like it's just fulfilling the obligation to celebrate Black History Month. And then as soon as February is over and we hit March 1st, it's just back to whatever. And so really, Black history is all around us and we need to be willing to acknowledge it. And if somebody doesn't have the same passion and the same determination that I do for my child, then I need to step up and take that on and not expect that it's going to happen because it hasn't so far.
Exactly. And we do this lived Black experience project. We do it to educate, enlighten, and inform. And so I'm listening to what's happening here in Arizona with how we are most likely going to educate our students, and that's why we do what we do here, and that's why we have you here leading us through these critical books to our culture. Do you what would you tell our audience why, how would you answer why it is important to celebrate and to honor and to learn Black history?
I think Black history it's not just Black people's history, it's the history of our nation. And in order to really understand who we are as a nation and how we got to where we are in the state that we are, you have to be willing to look back and walk through it. And it's not going to be walking through a bed of roses, but in order to really get an understanding, the more I read and the more I think about the situation with the African American in this lived Black experience, it really is a huge social experiment that has gone on. When you transplant somebody from where they were to where you want them to be, to do what you want them to do, and then eventually emancipate them, in air quotes, you just don't really know what you're going to get. And we still don't know what we're getting because it continues to evolve. But if we don't even care to acknowledge how we got here, we won't be able to get to a better place. And so it's going to take some really strong reflection and self-reflection and acknowledgement before we can really move past it. So it's not just about Black kids knowing Black people's history. It's about everybody knowing the history of our nation. And
Exactly.
sometimes we limit ourselves when we just say it's Black history. Actually, it's United States history that we need to be aware of and we need to acknowledge. There's, and other races and nationalities as well. Native Americans have a significant role in
Yeah.
our history, and we fail to acknowledge all that that is, but it's a huge part of where we are and why we are where we are today. So I don't know another way to answer that question, but we all need to own it and we all need to embrace it for better or for worse.
Exactly. But after reading the Miseducation of the Negro, how do you think Dr. Woodson, if he were here today on this show with us, how
Wow.
would you answer this question?
Wow, you asked the hard questions. There was a part in there, and I underlined it. Of course, I'm not going to be able to find it. But he talks about, let me see if I can get to it. It was, can I? Yeah, I mean, I think that it really kind of speaks to the acknowledgement of where we are. We need to understand who we are, to understand where we are, and we need to bring our people along with us. I think that was a big part of where he started talking about the educated Negro is we can't get educated and not go back to our people to help bring them up to where we are and feel like we've arrived. And he talks about some of it. I refer to it kind of as a catch 22, like how the African American student doesn't necessarily want to major and go into higher education and study some of those things where they don't feel like there are opportunities for them because they're Black. So I get that. Like, I don't want to invest my money in something that I don't think that I'm going to get a return on, feeling like I'm not going to be able to do something with it. But then at the same time, being willing to be somewhat of that trailblazer to push the limits and take risks so that we can really establish the path for our people that need to follow behind us.
Yes. We have a comment from Miss Deb, our community chiefess, and she's asking, do you also think that this is where the concept of it takes a village, when we talk about taking responsibility for educating ourselves and our children?
I think so on so many different levels. I think Deb is kind of the poster child for being the village. And I mean, she's my village in
Yep.
so many ways, even working in higher education. And you probably experienced this too, is when you see that African American student come through, you just want to give them everything you can to make sure that they have some of those things that other people don't see that they need. So really being part of that village when we get them to school. I think the village starts at home. There are so many things that I do know that I can teach my daughter, but there's so much that I don't know that I have to rely on other people in my village to help fill in some of those blanks because it's just, there's a lot to know, a lot to do, a lot to instill. So it really becomes overwhelming. And it even became overwhelming to me reviewing this book of that heavy responsibility, almost that burden almost of, gosh, it seems so impossible. Some of the things that he's writing about that we need to be willing to go back and take on. And it is a lot, but it doesn't mean that it's not something that we shouldn't chip away at. I know that I can't do it all, and I know that I'm just one person, but I can't let that be the reason that I don't give back. That needs to be the reason why I find a village and find ways to give back in a collective way.
Exactly. I'm going to ask this question because you still have a little one that you're grooming to be a beautiful soul in the world. Um, you know, I cannot. Uh, we did an LBE broadcast Wednesday evening where we talked about the legislation and ethnic studies. And so my mind, I cannot get away from asking, eh, especially an educator, what can we do? I remember there was summer vacation Bible school. We talked about we played school. Um, the church always had some kind of program when I was growing up that
Vacation Bible
introduced
School.
you, that kept you entrenched in our culture of we as a people of African descent. Have we gotten away from that? You as a parent of a little person,
Mhm.
are those activities still available? And how important to you as a parent personally do you think that those types of activities are?
Yeah, I think about things like the Vacation Bible School. So important, to first of all do something besides sit in front of a television or vegetate and eat your Frosted Flakes all day. Very important just to have some contact and to do something fun and positive. And so those things still happen. I think that they probably are happening on a smaller scale, COVID, but notwithstanding. But yeah, there are opportunities for like Vacation Bible School. Camps are big. It's hard, at least it's been hard for me to find something outside of church, which is great, but it's only for 1 week, that really focuses on the African American child and building that pride and building on those concepts of history and self-worth and things like that. It's been mostly just general, come to this organization, girls focused, kid focused, but not a lot offered as far as just empowering that African American side.
So what would you suggest? What should we be looking ahead? What should not even ahead? What should we be talking about right now? What sort of plans should we be putting in action to educate your daughter? We still have adults of color who
Mhm.
still need to be educated and informed and enlightened on who we are. We have been more than just slaves,
Mhm.
enslaved people in this country. So, give us some ideas. Where can we start by
Where can we start?
educating ourselves?
I think this forum is great for us adults. I feel like even a parent-child version of reading some books, getting together online, in person, in a healthy and positive environment to really review some topics in a child and parent friendly way would be a great way to approach it. I think, one of the things, I had a friend contact me several weeks ago about an organization, thinking about getting her daughter signed up for Jack and Jill. And I just kind of backed up. Like, I feel a certain kind of way about Jack and Jill because I was rejected, or I don't know if I was rejected, but I wasn't a contender for Jack and Jill when I was, because, yeah. And so I went on because I feel like the concept of that is wonderful. But then when you read the fine print, it's by referral only. You have to know somebody and be nominated in. When I was a child, I was told that I wasn't going to be nominated because my parents weren't educated. They weren't college graduates, and so don't bother. And so that was not an option for me. But I still like and I looked it up. I was like, maybe I remembered that wrong. But I looked it up and it looks like it's the same, that you need to know somebody to get in. And I have a huge issue with that. And I feel like there needs to be that kind of organization, a positive place where a child can go and not feel like they have to meet some kind of a social or economic or a level of connectivity to be able to be exposed to that. I think that what they do is most likely very positive and
Yeah.
empowering, but it's disappointing that all African American children don't have access to that, because I think that it could be a wonderful village.
That's true. I was a member of Jack and Jill's and up until uh, freshman year of college, and my parents got upset when I realized the hoity-toityness of it. And then they were asking, "Well, aren't you going to enroll our grandson?" And I was like, "Nope." And
Nope.
but it's really sad. Um, that at the foundation that is the foundation
Mhm.
of it, because it really was um, a great opportunity, a great experience. And so I think the very first time that I was introduced to the miseducation of the Negro was at we had our summer conventions, and
Mhm.
a vendor was there selling the book, and I bought it and read it. And I mean, this is like ninth or 10th grade.
Mhm.
And for the first time reading it, you mentioned earlier, and I'm trying to spread that same message that uh, Black history, African American history is indeed America's history. I'm going to put you on the spot. I want to ask you, how would you pitch this book to our European American readers and viewers?
How would I pitch it? I would say, if you read it, it will give you insight. People want to know the secret of, people want to know what we think. And knowledge is power. And if you want to know how we feel about the educational system, this would be a great place to start. And you can read this in the privacy of your home or wherever, at your pace, and deal with it as you read it. And then when you're ready, I'm happy to talk to you about it. But if you want to have a place to start, because I think that sometimes what happens is we feel that burden of, I need to educate you and I need to bring you up to speed, and that's heavy. It's already written, this information is out there. And if you want an insight, this would be a great place to start the conversation. This is my gift to you. If you're interested, like you say you're interested, then read this book. It's not that long, and
Right?
let's talk. I don't know how else to sell it other than knowledge is power. And
Hmm.
it's like you might, in history, that fear of, if these students read the Constitution, they might get some ideas. It's the same thing. If you read this book, don't be afraid. You might get some ideas.
Absolutely. Miss Deb has given us another comment. She says many of the Black sororities and fraternities have programs for young people, and she's giving a plug for her beloved Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated has
Mhm.
the Rosebuds, which I am very familiar with, for girls 8 to 12, and rowers for 13 year olds up into the senior year in high school. And she wants us to know that they do not have to be a nominated any or nominated.
Mhm.
Anyone can reach out and enroll their child, their little person, into rosebuds or rowers. So that's good to know.
That's definitely good to know. I'm thinking about your question about what is it that we need. And I think that those are exactly the kinds of things that we need, kind of nonpartisan, but positive, enriching, giving students that, building up their internal value system. And the way that we do that is by educating them about who they are. Because if we just continue to send our African American children to, dominant culture schools, we can't assume that they're going to get that.
That's true.
I think
That
we
is so
can
true.
we can probably assume that they will be overlooked, at times because of that implicit bias. So it's our responsibility to find avenues to empower them and build them up in spite of the adversity that we know that they're going to face.
Exactly. Um, do you think Should education serve to inspire you to do good and important things after, and I'm asking you this after reading Dr. Woodson's book?
Should it inspire? Yes, I think we should be inspired going into it. You know, if we're doing what we're called to do, and if we're working within the realm of our purpose and our passion, we shouldn't be able to help but to want to go back and do good and share and spread so that others can prosper.
So I asked you that question first because then my follow-up question is, I I'm here on a university campus, and I talk with in the College of Business, and so I'm talking with corporate leaders and different corporate representatives all the time. And after, I finished up, I read a few pages of Dr. Woodson's book earlier this morning in preparation for us talking today. And so now we're hearing, a lot of uh, self-made um, business people and self-made millionaires who are saying, "Oh, you don't have to go to college. College is a waste of money. It's a waste of time." I want to know your thinking on that. I think we as a people cannot afford not to go to college, because college is so much more than just getting or a major and getting a degree. But what do you say, Dr. Margaret?
Well, you know, in reading certain parts of this book, it kind of speaks to that a little bit that, you know, these educated Negroes, they go off and then they kind of become useless. They're educated in the dominant culture, and then they come back and they're kind of not relatable, not able to contribute to their own community, and then just caught in between these two worlds and don't fit in either place. So the book in certain sections makes an argument that the educated Negro is useless and often at that time didn't do as well as the uneducated who had more practical skills, who could go and make a living and support their family. I
Mhm.
so I'm more in line with where you are right now, that in these current times, um, you are not competitive at all if you don't have some kind of a credential. Does it have to be college? I don't believe that it has to be college, but in order to be able to get to the door, I'm not even saying a foot in the door, but in many cases, in order to be able to even travel to the neighborhood, to get to the door, to possibly have an opportunity without some kind of training or credential, it's just not going to happen. And I just feel like that's the society and the environment that we live in, is that education is assumed at this point. And so a college education is as assumed as a high school diploma at one time was. So without that, you are in many realms considered to be uneducated, even if you've graduated from high school. So I think pursuing some kind of training or higher education is really essential in today's society.
Absolutely. And as an educator, and I'm hoping that we have viewers who are perhaps the parents of students who will be first gen college students. Would you enlighten us on what other benefits are there to getting a college degree, or even just some sort of special certification, or an associate's degree? But can speak to that experience of being in some sort of academic environment, and what are the benefits besides just going to class?
Yeah, I have worked. I met Deb Harris working in residence life, and what I've learned and what I've told my own children, my stepchildren, they're old and grown, but when they were going off to college, was you need to live on campus at least 1 year, because half your education is going to happen from you being someplace semi sheltered, not all the way out by yourself, learning how to interact in the world. Because you've grown up, you've been sheltered, we've made all these decisions for you, and you've been sheltered. But now it's that transitional phase of interacting with people that you may not have had an opportunity to cross paths with. And it's not that it's going to be beautiful and wonderful all the time, but developing those skills of how to coexist, how to share space, how to make allowances, how to figure out who you are in relation to other people in that space of yourself versus in that space of my home, is an education that I can't give you. And then after you do your time on campus, then go do whatever you want to do. And I think that the university, which is where I have most of my, higher education experience, is it's that sheltered transition of learning how to adult. It's that first time for many people where you might have to actually go and advocate for yourself. Mom and dad aren't going to be able to go to the registrar's office and try to figure out, or we're not going to be able to go to financial aid and
Right.
solve your problem for you. You're an adult now, and this is a great opportunity for you to go figure some of these things out for yourself. So I think socially, it's an opportunity for growth. Economically, it's an opportunity for growth. And those are lessons that I would prefer you to learn in the shelter of a university campus as much as possible. I think you can get those kinds of life lessons from going to community college, even if you're commuting home. There are still some things, you're going to have to sit in class and adjust to people from outside of your high school.
Hmm.
And navigate that campus life. And it might be different than a residential campus. Trade school, I think it's the same thing. Those connections that you gain from being in an environment of higher learning are things that we can't replicate for you at home.
That's so true. Going back to a comment that you made just a little while ago when Dr. Woodson talks about the Negro who goes off and gets this education, and now he comes back and isn't really, or does not really have anything to give to their community. What do you think? Because they went off to school, they went to this most likely very fine university or college, and what do you think happened? Why did they come back to the community, being not being able to contribute back to the community?
I think Dr. Woodson would say that these people went off to be educated and pretty much indoctrinated into the mainstream culture. And, that's what they went for. And that's maybe not what they went for, but that's what they got, which really removed them from some of the ideals. Also learning some tasks that weren't really practical to bring back into the community. Feeling like they didn't, like, maybe I want to start a business, but I don't have people to hire into my business, those kinds of things. So just some of those barriers that maybe the education that they received was not practical to the environment that they were returning back to.
Absolutely. How how do you think, here we are in this present day, and that he wrote this book during a time where historically Black colleges and universities were really, I mean, that was our place to go. And but there were some students who had the opportunity to go to Cornell, to go to Harvard, to go to Yale. what, so, and I think in my experience of working at a PWI, I see the risk of our students of color being returning back to their community as the miseducated individual. What do you think we can do for to avoid that?
What do we do to avoid? I think some of the things that we might be able to do is to really instill into our graduates some of those practical skills and to have the I think it's a kind of a slap in the face to go to this institution. You think you're doing something great. You might be first generation, but really not knowing how to transition or how this education that you have is practical to your community.
Mhm.
Be prepared, and you don't want to go back thinking I'm going to fix everybody, because we're not fixing people, especially people who aren't broken, but people who might not fit into your ideals. And so I think that it's a two-sided thing, and I was thinking this as I read the book, is that we have these educated people returning to and having good intentions, but really not instilling in them throughout their education, asking them those practical questions. How are you going to use this when you get back? Because it's too
Right.
late to think about that after you get back and try
Yes.
back and regurgitate. Well, how would I? No, how will you? How can you make that adjustment now as you're walking through this program of what you can do, or what kind of resources are you going to need to put in place in order to take this information back? How can we start working on putting those things into place so that when you get back, it's relative to what you're interacting with. And then I think that we sometimes have to remember also that we might be coming against some attitudes as well. We have to face some of those personalities. Oh, well, you've been off to college, so now you're better than us, and really being prepared for that too, because that happens as well. Um,
Yeah.
so how are you prepared to respond to that in an understanding way, in a way that's not going to burn a bridge, but to build a bridge so that you can move past that?
Exactly. And our chiefess, Miss Deb, is telling us that it is important for those Black higher ed professionals to think critically about working at a predominantly white institution, or the acronym PWI, so that you are there to help those young people. And I want to say something about that because I've heard Miss Deb mention many times in conversations that we've had about working in higher ed, and I my experience, most of my higher ed experience is in an HBCU. And I can recall her saying when we talk about this is that she said, she had, I hope she doesn't mind me sharing her story, her testimony, her experience. But she's said, she had the opportunity to work at an HBCU, but she chose to work at a PWI so that she could be here to support those young people, or students who look like us, how to maneuver through this particular education experience. So, I wonder if some of these individuals that Dr. Woodson was referring to, like those students, I mean, I had an uncle who went to Cornell, and I I mean, I think he battled with making that transition back into Black culture in the South. But he was fortunate enough, and most of our people, and especially during that time, we became educators.
Mhm.
And so, but I really think that that's probably what helped him make that transition from PWI to now I'm back amongst my people. What do you think about that?
I wanted to go back to something that you said, that even when when we're talking about that transition back and how you can pay it forward, it doesn't have to be, I'm going to start a business. I mean, something grand. It could be something as simple as this was my experience as an African American student on a college university, and I want to share and impart this information so when you get there, or be that resource to you, because a lot of our students are first generation, and when they get on campus, they don't, we don't always have the luxury to say, Mom,
Yeah.
how do you do this?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like you got to navigate, and it takes energy where you could have been studying. So I think that is, I think some of what Ms. Deb is talking about is how can you pay it back, even just being willing to share your experience. And that is paving the way for and empowering people, saying, you know what, it wasn't the hardest thing. You can do it too. And
Yep.
this is how you can do it. And I want to be a resource to you from afar, from near, however I can, to make sure that you get through it so that we can build this village of resource for other people that are going to come afterwards.
Exactly, exactly. And I think both you and I would agree that in the over 25 plus years that Miss Deb was here on NAU's campus, because I'm we're in the studio from my office here on campus today, but how she has been a mentor to even the adults, to you and I coming into the PWI, and so we even had an educational experience, and getting acclimated to being in this educational environment and learning how to serve our students who are not of the dominant student population, or and even to faculty and staff
Mhm.
as well. So can you believe that we're already at the end of May?
I can't believe it, but I want to believe it because that means it's summer and I get a teeny weeny little break.
A teeny weeny little break. Do you know what we're reading for the month of June?
I do. Hold on a moment.
Okay.
It is right here. The month of June. Uh-oh, wait. Well, now hold on a second. Hold on.
Can't believe it's May 30th. While you're looking for that, we'll just jump just a little ahead to talk about what's coming up for our very first June broadcast of the Lived Black Experience Project. We're coming up on a year of doing this project, and bringing it to viewers in Flagstaff, in the state, the region. We have international viewers, coast to coast viewers. So we're really excited. And so we know that June, for people of African descent, we celebrate Juneteenth. Emancipation, Juneteenth, Liberation Day, June 1865. And so our first June LBE broadcast will be talking about Juneteenth, what it is, the historic background of it, and we'll have Professor Edward T. Cotham, who has written many books on the topic. His background is the Civil War, or his focus is the history of the Civil War. So of course, in all of that time period, Juneteenth occurred, and so we'll have our guest to talk about what Juneteenth is, and the history of that. So, did you find what we're reading in June?
I found it. Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. Yay, that's a good one. And The
It's
Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
all right. So we keep it for a surprise which one we're going to cover.
Would you
And
like to keep a
but
surprise?
both of
Okay.
those are, oh gosh, both of those I can't decide, but I can't wait to for you to let me know which one we're going to be talking about. Um,
Great.
don't forget, viewers, you still can get your copy of The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. And we also read this month Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which was the fiction. The Miseducation of the Negro is our nonfiction. We look forward to next month coming back with our book club discussion and review with Dr. Sister Margaret Boatright. We thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Margaret, you stay cool down there.
It's toasty.
All right.
You
Uh,
stay cool up there.
we are so far. So I know that's going to change. It's going to get a little hotter, but right now it's very nice and it's bearable. Thank you so much, LBE community, for joining us. Thank you to our partners, Southside Community Association, in partnership with Bright Side Bookshop right here in Flagstaff. So all of the books that we're reading, you can get from Brightside. They have a website, they have a Facebook page. You can call them. Please let them know that the Lived Black Experience Project sent you. And so until we meet again on June 8th, you take care and go in grace.